So Colt double-action swing-out cylinder revolvers date back to 1889, but they really got it right with a small gun intended for plainclothes use, for gumshoes and film noir, and that was the Colt Detective Special.
So right around the turn of the 20th century, Colt and Smith & Wesson are in a real arms race, literally. They're trying to outdo each other by creating the best police law enforcement revolver. Smith & Wesson developed the iconic .38 Special cartridge. It was the .38 Smith & Wesson Special. And Colt, they looked at this cartridge and they're like, man, that's a really solid cartridge design. Law enforcement agencies are loving this. We need to come up with a gun chambered for this round. And so they take their police positive and they come out in the early 20th century with the Police Positive Special. But there were some people out there who wanted something a little bit more compact.
In the late 1920s, John Henry Fitzgerald, who'd been one of the top designers at Colt, came up with a snub-nose revolver that he called the Fitz Special. And it was very radical. It had a tiny little 2-inch barrel, and it cut away the forepart of the trigger bow. But Colt looked at it and said, this is a good idea, and we can market this for plainclothes detectives.
So in 1927, they come out with the Colt Detective Special. Now, the reason they called it the Detective Special is this was still aimed primarily at a law enforcement market, but they were thinking that this was something that was going to fit the plainclothes policemen, the detectives who weren't necessarily going to be the ones that had their revolver readily at the hip.
They didn't need a 6-inch barrel. What they needed was a 2-inch barrel. And you would have fixed sights, front and back, true double action revolver, meaning you can either cock the hammer to fire it single action or just sweep through all the way for double action. This is one of the heydays of manufacturing. So the finish is top notch and the polish underneath it is even better.
The Colt Detective Special is smaller than the K-frame Smith & Wesson, but is larger than the J-frame 5-shot Smith & Wesson. Now, a lot of these had rounded butts, some had square butts. It's produced in royal blue that Colt was famous for, and also in nickel-plated.
Over the years, the gun was made up until 1993. It came out in about 4 different variations. And sub-variations of those, most of them being minor differences in, ejector rod lengths and this sort of thing. But a superb little gun.
Colt would later kind of update some features on these guns that were contemporary upgrades that some consumers were looking at the time. Like, for example, in the 3rd series, one thing they did is they shrouded the ejector rod. They added rubber wraparound grips to them. They offered them in different finishes. And really, the death knell for the Colt Detective Special was Colt's bankruptcy in 1992. After that, they made a few guns, but really it was just assembling what they had already produced in terms of parts.